What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? The barn smelled like the last hour of winter. Wet straw, iron, a sweetness that held the memory of heat. Light came in thin ribbons through slatted wood, and dust moved like slow stars. He stood in the doorway longer than he needed to, feeling the cold gather at the hem of his jacket, listening to the barn breathe. It was a house that remembered someone else's life. It kept the way the saddle sat crooked, the angle of a halter on a nail, a single pair of well-worn gloves folded so neatly they looked like a small, deliberate absence. He had learned how to make himself small since the phone call. Grief taught him to lower expectations and compress his days into manageable rooms. Today, like every morning lately, he counted out handfuls of hay as though each pinch could be an answer. He let the sound of the pony munching slow him. Let the plain animal routine smooth the edges that were still sharp in his chest. The pony appeared gradually in his field of vision. First a dark shape, then the outline of ears, the careful tilt of a head. It was smaller than he expected, the kind of size that makes you think of children's books and wrong-footed courage. Up close, its coat had the weary texture of someone who had seen storms and still chose to be soft. There was a scar behind one ear and a white snip on its nose, small marks like punctuation in a sentence you could not read all at once. He did not speak her name. Saying it felt like opening a door he might not close. Instead, he settled on the low step and watched the pony study him the way an animal might study the weather. Patient, exact, without drama. The pony's breath rolled out in small clouds, and the smell of wet hay lambent under it. When it stepped forward, the movement was unhurried, deliberate. Animals do not pretend to be brave. They choose a pace the world can follow. The pony's first real motion of welcome was modest. It nudged the sleeve of his coat with a soft whiskered muzzle, and then rested its forehead against his knee, heavy as a promise. The contact was a wordless thing, and beneath it a surprising warmth threaded through him. He had forgotten how small heat could be, how a breath against skin would reorient you to detail. He found himself returning the contact, his hand flattening against the pony's skull, feeling a pulse there like a slow drum. She had once braided this pony's mane while humming off-key tunes that made the birds stop to listen, and when he thought of that memory it did not arrive all at once. Instead it came in fragments. The angle of a knuckle, the way her laugh started in her shoulders, the soft impatience when the pony refused a treat. Memories arrived as objects, an empty mug on the counter, a glove with a rip at the seam, and each object opened a hollow that the pony's presence began to fill, not by taking the whole away but by changing the edges so the empty light fit differently. This pony was not a brochure's version of a therapy animal. It was not polished for cameras or trained to perform in neat intervals. It had a vocabulary of small, human gestures. The gentle shift of weight when someone needed silence, the precise tilt of its ears when a child said something that mattered, the way it would stand at the edge of a floodlight and refuse to move until a hand found its mane. It had memory, the kind that lingers in muscle and bone, and it carried an easy authority that belonged only to creatures who have watched the world change and decided to remain. On the first morning he fed it. The pony ate without ceremony but paused between mouthfuls to look at him as if checking an arrangement. He began to talk, at first to fill his own quiet, then because the pony seemed to accept speech the way a porch accepts rain. His words were small, the route he took to the market, the oddities of a neighbor, the way the radio downstairs kept playing a song she used to hate. He spoke with the thin, flat voice of someone who has learned that everything said aloud is liable to bend. The pony listened. It tilted its head with the patient curiosity of an old friend and then shifted its weight so that it stood with one hoof resting near his boot. That gesture, ordinary in itself, felt like a tether. He had spent months drifting inside his own head, cataloging losses in a ledger that never balanced. The pony's simple physical insistence that he occupy the same space as another heart began to undo the ledger page by page. There were small, uncanny moments that hinted at a deeper seam of connection. The pony would prick its ears at certain phrases, little words that she had said to it perhaps, that lingered like scents. It would become restless near a particular trunk in the tack room, pawing gently, as if remembering a coat tucked inside. Once, when he dropped a photograph he had been too afraid to look at and it slid beneath a pile of straw, The pony nosed the photo out and stood over it with a protectiveness that felt like someone reading aloud a line someone else had left unfinished. He found himself forgiving the creature the way someone forgives a stray for begging at their feet. Automatically, as though it were the law of the heart. He forgave the pony for the way it startled at thunder, for the stubbornness that made it refuse to step into the trailer the first week, for the way it nearly trampled the small patch of garden he had spent the previous summer coaxing into life. These small irritations resembled a life, and he clung to them the way people cling to clothes with familiar holes. In the afternoons he would walk a short path along the river, and the pony would follow, pad and trot matching to a kind of rhythm that resembled conversation. The little hooves on gravel made a tidy sound, a metronome for their fragile mornings. He began to mark time not by the calendar, but by these walks. First light with the pony, the slow wash of afternoon, the mute collection of stars. Each repetition was less a habit than a lesson in how to remain with another presence. One evening, long after the sky had folded into blue-black, he found himself telling the pony the thing he had never dared tell anyone, that he worried he had been living in suspended animation, that he was afraid his life had been reduced to echo. He imagined the confession would be absurd in the cold air, and yet when he spoke it, the pony leaned in and rested its cheek against his chest, as if to say the confession had weight and would be held. That night, when he finally closed the barn door, he walked away with mud on his boots and a sensation coiling in his chest like a thread. The pony watched him go, ears forward, eyes steady. He paused at the gate and turned back, curiosity and fear braided together. The pony did not follow this time. It remained under the light of the barn, a dark shape against the pale frost, breathing, slow and even. He left with a question lodged in his mouth that tasted like the winter air. Why had the pony let him come close? Why had a creature, small enough to be lifted, chosen to stand near a man whose hands trembled? He realized then that the haunting of the barn was changing. It was no longer only the echo of her absence, but the quiet footfall of something that might, by degrees, teach him how to step again. Outside, the river moved like a thought that could not be finished. The pony blinked, making a white cloud of breath that vanished into the cold. He walked down the lane until the barn light receded, and then looked over his shoulder. The pony was still there, watching, not moving. He felt as though he had been granted a small, stalled mercy, the knowledge that someone, some animal, had noticed him. Why had the pony followed? He began to keep one eye on the pony the way someone keeps one eye on a rising bruise, out of habit and a quiet fear of what it might mean. Days passed like pages turned without much attention, yet within the ordinary rhythms of feeding and brushing there were fissures where the past cupped at the present. The pony started to act like memory had a map and was retracing steps. It would refuse to cross the little wooden bridge by the stream until he stood on the far side and called it. Sometimes, without warning, it would scoot toward the attic door and nudge it with a persistence that felt like a directed grief. Its ears would prick at certain words. When he said her name too loudly, it would drop its head as if listening for wind. At other times, it danced impatiently when the radio played a song she once hummed while making the bed. These were small things, and yet they accumulated like weather. He tried to explain them away. Animals are associative, he told himself. Horses remember stable rituals. Small creatures tie sound to scent. But when patterns keep repeating in the exact language of someone else's life, explanations become thin. One rain-slick evening, he found the pony restless in a way that scraped at his nerves. It paced the stall, shifting weight, breathing too fast for the cold air. It pushed its nose against the hay box and pawed at the floor as if searching for something beneath the surface. He followed its nose, and his hand brushed a corner of an old blanket pushed beneath a pile of bedding. When he pulled the blanket free, there was a folded envelope tucked inside, sodden at the edges but still whole. His fingertips trembled when he opened it. The handwriting inside was hers. The slope of the letters, the loop on the Y, the way she underlined once and then crossed it out. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and oil, a smell he had not realized he'd linked to her until now. The letter read like a private map of a life. Apologies for small neglects, confessions about the way she thought the pony had more courage than she ever did, instructions about the blue bowl in the cupboard, and at the bottom, a sentence that stopped him like a hand on the shoulder. If something happens, she had written, let him keep the barn light on. Let him have the river path when he wants it. Don't try to fix everything for him. He knows how to carry what needs carrying. The words were ordinary and impossible at once. He had read lists of bills and funeral arrangements in the weeks after she was gone, but nothing in those dry columns prepared him for a note that sounded like a deliberate tenderness. He reread the line until the letters blurred, and then the crying began in a way that did not consult thought. It was a small, animal sound, the kind a body makes when a weight finally gives. The pony pressed its muzzle against his chest and stayed there. It did not move when he wept. It only remained. The steady, warm presence of something that refused to leave, because grief for the pony had a different grammar. Horses do not promise to fix, they promise to stand. Its breathing slowed his, and the rhythm of that breath organized the chaos into something bearer-sized. That night, he slept in the tack room, the letter clutched like proof that she had thought future miles ahead. He woke to the pony standing so close he felt the tiny scrape of its whiskers against his face. Outside, the world had a glassy hush that followed rain. He read the letter again, tracing the loops of handwriting as if they were a map of a shoreline. He had to learn. In the weeks that followed, he started to speak differently to the pony. There were confessions, apologies, muffled laughter, and questions that asked for simple honesty. He told the pony about the mornings he woke and could not remember whether he was breathing for himself or for a habit. He admitted the petty things, the half-finished projects, the shirt left unreturned, and the large ones, the wild imaginings of what might have been. He spoke with a rawness that felt shameful, but the pony answered only with presence. Nudges, a slow blink, the exact pressure of a forehead against his hand. Small acts became thresholds. One afternoon he found an old carved wooden box pushed beneath a hay bale. He did not know how it had slipped there, or whether she had tucked it away intentionally. The pony had been pawing the ground near the bale, urging him, insisting. Inside the box was a photograph he had forgotten he'd lost. A picture of the two of them on a summer hill, the pony between them, all three of them squinting into the light. In the corner of the photo she had scribbled a single word: carry. He understood then that her instructions had not been only practical. They were a permission. They asked him to carry what needed carrying, and to accept being carried in return. Grief, she seemed to say in the quiet of her handwriting, was not a pile to be heaved alone, but a load that could be shared. The breaking point came unexpectedly. He had been avoiding the church graveyard because the route there passed a bench they had once used to watch storms roll in. The day he could no longer avoid it. The sky was flat, and the light was colorless in a way that made everything seem smaller. He walked to the bench and sat. For a long time he did nothing but let the bench hold him. Then he heard the soft shuffle of hooves, and the pony was there beside him, as if it had known this was the day he needed to be witnessed. He took the letter from his pocket and read it out loud, haltingly at first, then with an urgency that wiped out the space between words. He read the parts about the small rituals she loved, the list of chores with tiny jokes in the margins, and then the line that had been almost tenderly cruel in its simplicity. Promise me you'll laugh again. When he reached that line, the sound that left him was not just crying. It was a kind of unfastening, a surrender he had avoided because surrender felt like losing her twice. The pony rested its forehead on his shoulder and did not attempt to soothe or to reframe. It allowed the grief to exist in full and held its ground. There was something almost sacred in the way it carried him while asking nothing. After that day, the world did not become gentle, but the edges felt less like traps and more like doorways. He slept better. He cooked more. He let a friend call, without inventing excuses. The change was not dramatic. Healing rarely is. It was a thread reweaving through fabric that had been shredded. The pony's presence made space for tiny recoveries. A laugh snatched back from a remembered joke, a walk taken without counting down the minutes, a mailbox checked without dread. Months later, on a morning that smelled of cut grass and the faint, metallic sting of summer rain, he watched the pony stand at the river's edge and watch the current. People from the town had begun to bring small donations of carrots. Children who once feared the barn now came to feed the little creature with sticky hands. The pony allowed them to climb a rump and to whisper secrets it could not understand. It nudged the smallest ones with a gentleness that made the adults look on and smile with what felt like relief. On a quiet afternoon, as he brushed the pony's coat until the sun made the hairs shine like a scattered handful of coins, he found a tiny, weathered tag sewn into the halter. On it, someone had etched a word in cramped letters. Carry. It was the same word from the photograph, the same instruction she had left folded in paper and tucked in blankets. He traced the letters with his thumb until the edges of the metal warmed. He had thought the letter was the revelation, the final key. But the tag was the real last piece. A small physical loop connecting all the loose ends. It was a message not only for him, but for anyone who might ever find themselves in a barn with an animal that refused to leave. The pony had been the courier of that permission, a living hinge that allowed him to both grieve and continue. They settled into a quieter life. The barn light kept on. The river path walked, the neighborly coffees accepted. He found, in small measures, laughter returning like a bird finding a house again. There were new rituals that felt like repair, mornings with coffee brewing and the pony's soft nuzzle, evenings spent patching fences while the sun set like a hand closing on the day. On the last page of the months that followed, when he sometimes looked back at the rawness of the early days, he understood something simple and terrible and true. The ones who carry you are often the ones who do not know the full weight of what they carry until you are strong enough to notice. Sometimes the ones who carry you are the ones no one else saw coming. If this story touched you, subscribe, leave a comment, follow, and press the bell icon to watch daily videos and enjoy.